Welcome to People Potential with Amanda. Thank you for listening in today. I'm your host, Amanda Flasing, and I'll be bringing on various experts to discuss empowering individuals and organizations to achieve their full potential. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Potential with Amanda. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Brad Harris, who is a professor of management and HR at HEC Paris, and he's the co-founder of People Leader Accelerator, which is the premier professional development program for HR leaders in high-growth companies. He's also a managing partner at Trailhead Consulting, a senior advisor at Series B Consulting, and along with Andrew Bartlow, who was a previous guest on the podcast, he's the co-author of Scaling for Success, People Priorities for High Growth Organizations. Welcome, Brad.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Brad, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Aside from these professional accolades, what can you share?
Yeah, I'm a teacher through and through, but it took me a while to get here. My passion, my purpose is helping people reach their true potential. This started at a young age. I wanted to be a youth minister. Then I kind of pivoted to something else, wanted to be a high school teacher. Then I wanted to be a basketball coach. And it took a lot of trying on different hats and honestly failing a bunch of times to figure out what I wanted to do. And I finally found this job where you can be skeptical, a little bit cynical, and really dive into these places where you can just argue and debate ideas in a way that also helps people grow. And that's being a professor. Since then, I've started branching out into some more practical consulting type work. And I think I'm getting closer to finding where I'm supposed to be in this world. So teacher through and through, I'm here to help people grow.
That is awesome. And it brings us right into my first question. So we were chatting about self-awareness on one side, self-improvement on the other, and then where those two intersect with helping and coaching others. So what do you think comes first, knowing yourself or helping others? And then how can we enable the two? How can we enable them to scale for a team, for departments? Then are there any maybe frameworks that you could share about that?
Yeah, I'll do my best. So you deserve credit for taking us in this conversation before the podcast in this direction. I think this is such an interesting question because a lot of us would intuitively assume, and I think we'd be right in a lot of cases, that we first have to be self-aware and kind of need to understand ourselves and where we're going before we can start improving, and certainly before we can start improving others. But maybe anecdotally, maybe because I watched too much Ted Lasso, but a lot of my own experiences recently have suggested we actually learn quite a bit through the process of helping others. So maybe there's some baseline level of self-awareness and self-improvement we need to go through first, but just getting our hands dirty and helping other people ask questions, affirming them while also challenging them, I think is a pretty important process in our own growth. I've actually done some research on this that tangentially gets at this idea. And in that research, what we find is like these people that are in teams that are often giving advice to different people are sometimes the source of the team's most creative ideas, which would support sort of our theory that we were debating and kind of banding about, that, you know, when you're in the weeds helping other people, we gain insights that then help us. I got to say, this is also quite a personal topic right now for me, because I think after over a decade of teaching, and some of the same themes come up in a lot of my leadership classes, I started to feel this tinge of guilt, this nagging feeling that, hey, you keep telling people that you've got to do this, you got to do this, and namely, if you want to achieve some sort of big time self-awareness and impact, you've got to be bold. And it kind of feels like you're falling into a rut of being a little bit boring. And so this is definitely a case where I decided, you know what, maybe it's time for a change, to do something different. So let's write this book, let's get involved with People Leader Accelerator, and then let's move our family of 5 plus a dog to Paris all of a sudden from Texas, which is just a modest cultural change. Okay, so you also you also asked, like, how do we actually scale this? And I'm not really sure that like this intimate coaching style that we're both fond of is really scalable in a meaningful way anyway. There's parts of it though that are scalable, and I think that's where we can learn. So if we're talking about the team level, so 5, 7, 10 people, I think we as leaders, whether it's HR leaders or any type of team leader, have an opportunity to create some norms that allow people to have these conversations. And so one thing we can do is make sure our organizations and our teams have really meaningful, rich one-on-one regimens. And this is more than just informal check-ins. It's certainly more than just, how are you doing on this particular task? It's about understanding people's personal and professional goals, making sure we're holding one another accountable, and that we're sort of going in this journey together to the extent that it's appropriate, as a leader, as a follower, and as a teammate, in a way that keeps people moving toward where they want to go.
So in those, you're empowering the managers for the one-on-ones of like with some skills and frameworks or processes. And then if you empower all these different managers, then that's how you could scale that at a larger company.
Yeah, I mean, most initiatives, most of these positive initiatives, like the ones that we're probably going to talk about a lot today, are really a function of empowerment. And this is really something, I think we'll talk about this maybe later on in the podcast, if we get there. But HR leaders are notorious for trying to do everything themselves. And a lot of times when leaders don't know what to do, they go to HR and say, fix this, give us a training, do this, do that. That's an impossible spot. We have to be able to deflect, keep people prioritized, but also say, no, this is not a me thing. This is a manager thing. This is a leader thing. And so giving people latitude, both managers and the frontline employees, is a pretty big deal for scaling any of these initiatives.
Absolutely. And let's jump into a totally different topic, but getting on the more personal side of things, the feelings that maybe not everyone wants to talk about all the time, but imposter syndrome. And it is one that keeps coming up over and over again. I see it on my LinkedIn feed all the time. And I see it's like maybe predominantly women are talking about it more than men, but it doesn't mean that it's a female only thing. And to be honest, most of us at some point in our careers or more regularly than not have been there. So we might actually have the skills and experience or the competencies, yet we might still feel like we're not as good as others, or that imposter feeling, or like, am I really, what am I doing up here telling others what to do or giving advice? Maybe I'm not as good as they think I am. And that's my, little definition. But how would you, from a professional and academic standpoint, define imposter syndrome? And then let's dive into, what does it mean for an HR leader specifically?
Okay, well, keep me honest on this response. I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of experience with imposter syndrome. I also suffer from this affliction. Even when people read my bios or these, this weird exercise we go through on LinkedIn, or when we get nominated for a position and we have to write our own bio, like I feel guilty. I'm like, oh, this stuff looks kind of good, but I know deep down, like I am just a fraud. Like this cannot be. I am not a professor at a top 10 business school. I am a professor at a top 10 business school, but
Exactly.
I don't feel like it. Okay, so imposter syndrome, this has got to be in the top 5, maybe even top 3 things that comes up in People Leader Accelerator, which is really high potential HR leaders that are hand selected, that are already in awesome HR jobs. So these people are not imposters, but they all feel this way. This comes up in my undergrad and my MBA classes too. I've taught at some really good universities and often the best programs in those universities. So like, it's a thing. I want to call out before I gloss over this that there is sort of a gendered component to this imposter syndrome. And so I think you're probably right. And I think we have data that would suggest that this affliction, this phenomenon, affects women perhaps more than men, at least in a general sense. That stems from a couple of different things. Some that are kind of expected, but still not healthy. And I think one thing that I'm trying to be more mindful of is, I benefit in most cases in the business setting and the academic setting from an environment where, like, it's okay to project confidence. That's what we're told to do as men and athletes and all these things growing up. And I'm not sure that all women have been socialized that same way. And likewise, I'm not sure men, and I probably fall into this bucket too. I really hope that I'm getting better at it. Create an environment where it's okay to say, hey, I don't know something, but I still think this is the right way to go. Okay, so imposter syndrome comes up a lot. It affects rock stars too. I remember this story that Taylor Hawkins, the late great drummer for the Foo Fighters, told on a radio show that he's playing for the Foo Fighters. First time he goes into the studio, Dave Grohl, who was he was the lead singer of Foo Fighters, but the former drummer of Nirvana, is there. And Hawkins doesn't want to play drums. He's fine in the shows because Grohl's playing guitar. He doesn't want to play in the studio because, how can he be good enough? Like, how can he do this? And so anyway, he worked through it. Maybe we'll come back to that. So this affects rock stars, people that are on stage in stadiums, just as much as it affects HR leaders, academic students, and the rest of us. All right, back to the terms. Imposter syndrome is really, I'm drawing from a colleague of mine, a good friend named Richard Gardner, that's actually studied and written about this stuff. And when I read their work and the work of the others, I think imposter syndrome is simply like this intense feeling of being a fraud among high achieving individuals. I think that definition is intuitive. I like it though, because it does put some boundary conditions. It's just like some of us probably are, like, what we're feeling is not imposter syndrome. It's actually insecurity, because even though we might have the potential, we've never done this thing before. But others of us have actually done it and we still feel that way. And that's not cool. So help me out. Like, where do we want to take this conversation next?
What does it mean for an HR leader specifically to have imposter syndrome? And like, it's different than a rock star or than even a professor like yourself. If you're in HR, you're the person that people turn to for best practices. What should we do? If you're an HR leader, the executive team turns to you for, strategic and tactical solutions. Let's say during the last few years, HR leaders have been in the hot seat. Like, what should the policies be? How do we keep our people safe? How do we keep them productive? So what does it mean if you, in those situations, you suffer from imposter syndrome?
Yeah. So HR leaders, they are in a tough spot always, but you mentioned the past couple of years for sure. And I'm working with HR leaders sort of in this high growth startup space. So they're doubling their headcount every 1 or 2 years, and they're going through different phases of the organizational maturity cycle. And I think it's especially acute there. Look, you're right. We manage a lot of stakeholders. We've got this crazy situation. We have all these external things going on, and people only come to us when they have problems that they don't feel confident answering. So, and I'm talking like C-suite. Some people really value HR from the jump. Other people think like this is necessary evil. We're going to get compliance in. We're going to use this person to manage talent acquisition. But really, you're tactical. You're not strategic. And then we have these oh crap moments of like there's a global pandemic, or we have our CEO in a major scandal. What do we do? And that's really not fair, because there are not many playbooks for handling a global pandemic. So really, to me, it's not surprising that a lot of really qualified HR leaders are feeling imposter syndrome. But what we're trying to work them through is give them a network of support and helping them build confidence that you don't have to know the answers, but you have to know the questions to ask. And how do we sort through this world where the answer is always, it depends?
Yeah, that's a great, those are some great steps to help overcome and just put you on like the step moving forward, get a network, ask the right questions, and you will get through it like so many of us do in different situations.
Well, can I tag on one part to that? Because I think
Yeah.
we have some really good research here. I'm calling back to my colleague, Richard Gardner, and his co-authors. It's not just any social support network that matters. I guess there's possibility to have value in any support network, but it's our friends and family that can help mitigate the feelings, these negative side effects of imposter syndrome. It's professional mentors, people that have a little bit of distance from us and a little more, they're not direct threats. But there is this weird possibility that if our network is only our peers at work in largely the same jobs, it can backfire. The support is not supportive, it's counterintuitive. And, Dr. Gardner does a good job of explaining this is when you go ask everybody else for help, these people that are supposed to be supporting you, and they actually have answers, it sort of does this weird jujitsu thing on you and validates that, wow, if they know all the answers and I don't, I really must be an imposter. So you really need to find a network of people that are not in your exact same spot, probably outside of your organization or at least your rank, that can validate you, affirm you, but also give you the guidance you need.
That's really interesting. That's a great tip because we do often tend to turn to our colleagues, their closest proximity, and we might be feeling this in the workplace, but having that external perspective and external challenge, and maybe someone who's viewing you from another angle will say, well, we'll ask you more questions versus just giving you the solution. And then by solving it yourself, you'll realize like I got this, I know the answer. Instead of just receiving it and saying, oh, okay, well, that person knows, but I maybe didn't know right away. That's excellent steps to help overcome imposter syndrome. Thanks. So let's jump into self-awareness and developing self-confidence. So these also tie directly in with the imposter syndrome that we were talking about. So to help develop these, do you recommend using a psychometric assessment to your clients or any different types of tools for themselves, so for HR leaders, and to help their teams with these areas?
Yeah. So I'm an academic by training. So I just got it, like, two of the things that have been drilled into me are reliability and validity. If you don't have these, you shouldn't be using these assessments. And so I'm still working through how to talk to this like a normal human being. I am a fan of assessments so long as they align with the goals that we're after. So one of the things that I have frequently used, usually in my MBA classes, but sometimes in the practical setting, is personality measures that have been validated. I think these are good because they learn about our tendencies. Personality and personality traits are really just, it's a motivational theory. These are dispositional things that tell us like how do we behave in an effort to get along and or get ahead in society. So we can learn about our tendencies. Personality is also stable enough, not completely stable, but stable enough that it's predictive of some important performance outcomes. So it's useful, but it's only predictably so at a level that it's not overly deterministic. We don't have to say like, oh, I'm an introvert, I'm damned forever. Like it's this fatalistic view. So yeah, I am a fan of assessments. I think at the team level, they can also help us understand differences. Where I fall off on assessments, and really this is more of a conversation of we can use anything you want, but we're going to recognize the boundary conditions of when it adds value. I don't like assessments that people end up using that say, or they use them as a crutch or an excuse. Like, this is how I process information. And that means like, anytime someone approaches me differently, well, it's just who I am. Like we can't be that way. We have to always be growing, but the self-awareness, yes, assessments are one possible tool that I have used in the past that can help get us there.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's important to select the assessment carefully and choose something that doesn't put you, maybe categorize you into like five broad types of people, and make sure there's a lot of nuance, definitely reliability, and self-awareness. Like I'm a huge fan of just knowing yourself, but as
Right.
you were saying, don't use it as a crutch. Just because you're not doing something naturally, a behavior is not natural to you, doesn't mean you can't do it. Just means it'll take more effort. It'll take more practice. But if that behavior is required in your job, then you will have to work on it. And hopefully it's not something that's needed all the time in your specific role, because that would be pretty draining. But if it's just a small portion of your role and what you need to develop, I think that's totally doable. Um, and the
Yeah.
more you understand yourself, the more you can have that clarity of like, let me focus on my areas of strength and develop those areas that are less natural, but that are still important.
Yeah, bingo. You're super sharp here, and that's exactly how actually you said it really eloquently in ways that I should borrow and steal from my own class. But when you're talking about self-awareness and how we use these traits and these general dispositions, it's we have to be open to change, and we have to be there's like a really interesting connection between our values and our behaviors. Like on one hand, like we need values to be specific enough that we can tie them to behavior so that we can actually feel like we're living them out. But we can also never look at a particular behavior and assume that behavior in and of itself is reflective of a value. When we do that, that's where we get into these like, I just can't do that. I can't do it that way because that's not who I am. It's really like any part of Brad Harris. This is something that I've, a few decades into the making here, but any part of Brad Harris is negotiable except the core values that I have. How we manifest those core values or how I manifest those is, that's an ongoing journey. So I love the way you phrase that. I would tell my students we need plan, practice, and partnership if we want to take on these big change initiatives. The 3 Ps: plan, practice, partnership. Partnership being sort of your accountability person. But if you can do that, that makes it a lot easier to try on these new things.
Oh, yeah. Having the accountability really helps with making changes, especially for things that are less natural, that require more effort. So you have to check in with someone other than yourself
Yeah, yeah.
to make sure you're progressing. And let's just take a little left turn here and
Okay.
talk about what are ways that HR leaders can help others in the organization grow. So we're talking about, self-awareness, developing self-confidence with assessments for yourself, using assessments as one tool, one of many tools, for others, for teams, for managers. What are some other ways that HR leaders can help um, develop? So mainly doing talent development, leadership development.
Okay. Well, let's think about how people get into HR, and then how, more importantly, like how do they take that job in HR and move up the ranks to some sort of like meaningful leadership role. These are people that they're smart, they've hustled, and they said yes to a lot of stuff. That's how you get these opportunities. You say yes to stuff that you don't even want to do. And in some ways, I think it's fairly common. I don't want to put a percentage on it, but in some ways, like the people that go into HR and that rise the ranks are people pleasers. And I mean this in a really good, genuine way. I think one of the ways that you can serve your organization and your stakeholders, including your employees, is to realize like clarity is kindness. I can't say yes to everything. I can't be everybody's best friend. But what I can do is help direct us towards some sort of clear priorities or the purpose of the organization, and make sure that we have systems in place that allow people to thrive and grow. And so we talked about one-on-ones earlier. That's a big thing. Like we have to hold our mid-level managers accountable for their role in the growth story. We can't. Here's a common thing that we see in the startup space. We get a bunch of first-time managers, not even HR managers, just throughout the business, and they come to HR and they say, "Oh man, our employees are leaving. They're frustrated. It's comp related, and it's usually not comp related. It's usually growth story related." You drill deeper into that, it's like, oh yeah, we need career ladders. We need to get this new program in to do career ladders. And there's a place for that, but it's probably not at a startup where you don't even know if you're going to be around 6 months from now. So it's about helping the managers figure out what can you do to facilitate conversations and help people feel like they're moving forward, even if we don't know exactly what the internal ladder is going to be for these people. I think another big thing is creating an architecture for meaning. So one thing that we talk about at HEC, you say it much more eloquently in French than I do, but I'm working on that. But at HEC, we're talking about this idea of purpose and purposeful organizations and how important this is. And I think, that's a CEO thing, like this external facing purpose. Why does this company exist? But it's very much an internal facing thing too. helping employees understand the purpose, not just to direct their work, but also so they get some intrinsic buy-in. So prioritizing where we're going to spend our time, talent, and energy is one way that we drill down on purpose. But when I say architecture of meaning, there's also several other workarounds, even if you don't have this really compelling Mother Teresa-like purpose in your organization, that we can give people meaning. And so the answer is always it depends, but some general ways that we can create a place that allows people to have meaning and will allow them to develop is like, do people have autonomy? Can we give them autonomy so that they can exercise parts of themselves and show their value? Do they see impact in their work? And here I'm talking about impact of, like, can people see how it affects external stakeholders? Maybe it's just customers. It doesn't have to be, solving world hunger or anything, but just show me that I'm not just turning in these 3 different TPS reports. I guess that's a dated reference now, but we're just doing these reports, and it affects nobody in the organization. Can we have space that people can actually develop some sort of sense of craftsmanship in their work? Can we feel like experts and take pride in what we're doing? That is difficult in a rapidly changing environment. And then here's the one that I think I don't have the answer here, so I hope you don't ask a follow-up, but do we have like enriching relationships? And I think I know some ways that we can get at enriching relationships at work. The next question that you should ask me that I'm going to ask you not to is, like, how do we navigate that in this new world where some of us are remote, some of us are in person? The water cooler is now this fictional thing of folklore. But do we have meaningful relationships? If you can do all of those or any of those things, you're moving your workforce to a place where they're going to perceive more meaning in their work. And that's going to let them invest, ask questions, and hopefully jump on board these developmental initiatives that you have for them.
Absolutely. I won't ask you that follow-up question, but I
Thank
will
you.
add another one. I think recognition is one that I would add there to make sure, because sometimes we get so caught up, especially at high growth startups, which I'm fortunate to be in that space. So I can speak from that, is sometimes you're moving forward so fast and you don't take time to celebrate what are the small wins that we have along the way. And we're just constantly wanting more and more and more, trying to achieve our very ambitious objectives. So taking that time for recognition, and that is one that we do these employee pulse surveys, and you could see what's missing. And like, maybe you can, as a manager, have a view of, okay, I'm not giving enough recognition, or you might feel it yourself, like it would be nice to celebrate some of the things we've achieved. So I like the perspective of taking time within teams, and also for yourself to reflect on, like, where are we winning? What are we doing really well at? And then what are we learning? And then what do we keep improving? What do we need more of? Where are we stuck? And sometimes we get, caught up in that third one, like, where are we stuck? How can we keep improving?
Yeah, you're living this stuff. Recognition is huge. I'm just going to validate your point, but add like 2 very specific reasons that I think it's important, like you're suggesting. One is, when you recognize employees, you get this spillover effect. It also highlights to other people that didn't get the direct recognition, or other teams that didn't get it. Like, this is the stuff that adds value. So, and you didn't lose anything. We didn't dock your pay. We didn't pay that person more or anything like that. But this is somebody that could be a role model, at least for this particular task or this project or whatever. Likewise, I've conducted some research with some colleagues, and we compared all these different teams in the same organization. And so this is a bigger organization than a traditional startup. But we found that teams that had an employee that got this organization-wide recognition had the team itself ended up working harder the next time. Like, it's a thing that rises all boat, right? The rising tide raises all boats.
Cool.
Yeah, so recognition, like, you're right. Like, we can only pay so much, and there's problems when we introduce pay anyway, but we have no limitations on recognizing really good contributions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like as a manager, you have to remind yourself sometimes too, have I like does my
Yeah.
team know that I really appreciate the work that they're doing? Do other people at the company, exactly as you were saying, see that work? Do we have opportunities for more visibility? And going back to your other statement, and I know you asked me not to bring it up, but I do have some ways that we've worked at Success Finder to help
Yeah.
build a feeling of belonging, create connections with people that are not on your team. So, one thing we implemented was a buddy system when somebody starts. So, it's a virtual weekly 15-minute meetings with someone that's not in your team, not in your direct department, so that you have time to just have that water cooler chat in a more like it just has to be more planned out and thought out and create those opportunities for connection in a digital world. So I think so many of us start SaaS startups or companies that have moved fully remote or hybrid, like we're at a hybrid, we're doing a hybrid situation here, but you have to set times for connecting with more purpose and intentionality. So we do like virtual 5 à 7 or like cocktail hours or all hands regularly. We find like just different ways to connect. We have a whole Teams channel for the whole company. So just finding these little ways. We have HR coffee hours. We've been testing, we continue to test and find ways to connect both in person at different activities, like what are reasons for us to come together. So we'll have an activity in
Yeah.
September, but how can we do it virtually as well?
Yeah. I mean, you said the big one to me is, can it be intentional, and can it like, so we lose the water cooler and so what? Like I have a colleague um named and a friend of People Lead Accelerator, an excellent coach consultant named Ann Jacoby, and she has this wonderful newsletter. And maybe a month or two ago, she put out one like, let's be honest, were we ever more creative because of the water cooler? And I think that's right. And like we do ourselves, humans, we do ourselves such a disservice when we try to like always tie some clear business value or some profit seeking value to things like DEI or being in person and connections. Like some of these things we should do because they're enriching and they're the right thing to do. And we don't really have a clear uh, at least on a quarterly basis, some sort of metric we can tie it to. But can we be intentional about creating inclusion, belonging, being fair, developing these relationships? That's the ticket. So yeah. And I love that you said you're testing.
Yeah.
That's where I've just been gun shy by peer reviewers in the academic system. Like, I don't know. I have to watch a little bit and see what works and what doesn't work. So yeah, keep testing.
Yeah, we've certainly been testing all kinds of different things, but what I do like and what came up in a previous episode of the podcast is that having these intentional digital first ways of connecting has actually helped with that DEI and feelings
Yeah.
of belonging. Because if you're not the type of person that would have felt comfortable chatting it up with the CEO at the water cooler or, picking up your coffee or something, well, you might have those opportunities in a more intentional setting. So it's been an interesting, I think we're going to keep seeing really interesting findings come up in our hybrid and remote first world with all the different tactics that HR leaders are testing, continuously testing.
Yeah, I mean, the opportunities are there. We just have to find them and figure out how to tap into them the best way, I guess.
Absolutely. So, Brad, to close off our episode today, I'm going to ask you my signature question for the podcast. And it is, how do you unlock your potential?
Yeah, I am still very much a work in progress. So I'm a runner. And a few years back, I bought this old Nike vintage running poster. It shows this guy running on a 2-lane highway. It's these big trees around him, Seattle, Oregon, something like that. And at the bottom, it says, "There is no finish line." And I've loved that picture, but I love that tagline, which is common with Nike running stuff. And I've sort of, at least for where I'm at right now, that's sort of my mindset. Like there is no finish line. And so it's always about, for me, like, how can I enjoy and get value from this process and whatever the pain and suffering I'm going through on this run, and not worry so much about the destination. As part of that, I'm sort of in this weird stage. I don't know that it's midlife crisis or anything like that, but I'm in this weird stage where I'm also trying to look back at who I was, how I got here, all these things, and be able, to borrow from Adele, like, go easy on myself a little bit, and kind of reclaim what was good, and realize, like, hey, you were really goal driven and had this what's next mindset, and there were costs to that. Like, it manifested in some unhealthy ways, but it did get you here, and you did learn a lot. So how can we look at this kindly? And then how can I use that information in my role as a coach, consultant, and especially a teacher to help other people kind of excel on their own journey? So that's where I'm at. There is no finish line mindset that I'm just living right this second. And that's sort of my ticket. I'll let you know if I figure it out for sure, though.
I don't know that any of us have it really figured out, but we find things that work for us. And I think it sounds like you have a lot of self-awareness about being very goal-driven, and that you're purposefully working on not letting everything be about the goal and enjoying the journey along the way. And I think, we can see with your beautiful background there a little of the Parisian landscape. So thank you so much for joining in from beautiful Paris today. And I think you're really working towards that with, like, enjoying that journey. So enjoy some delicious croissants and the beautiful streets of Paris. And thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, this was cool, Amanda. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us on People Potential with Amanda. I appreciate each and every single listen and view. If you've enjoyed this content, it would really mean the world if you could leave us a 5-star review. This will make a huge impact in increasing the visibility of this podcast, on top of brightening the day of a few people here at Success Finder who work really hard behind the scenes to make this all happen. We're continuously working on new episodes, so be sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss a thing. Until next time, stay curious.